Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So I'm going to be backtracking a little bit on the current project. This stuff, the footage that you're going to see in this video is a few weeks old now. And the reason I'm showing it, and the reason I'm kind of backtracking a little bit is because, for one, I didn't realize that I wanted to start doing these kind of vlog style videos at this point yet, or like when I started this project. So I'm going to kind of backtrack because there's something very important I want to talk about that went very wrong with the beginning part of this project that will probably never make it into any other videos that I ever do. So I want to make sure I talk about it here because it's actually a very good learning opportunity. So my original plan for this project was to build this whole cabinet out of this 8-quarter Makore. Now I bought this Makore a few months ago just with the idea of trying something new. I saw a posting for it on Facebook Marketplace that someone was selling, and then when I talked to them, they told me they could order in a little bit more higher quality stuff, and I just said, let's go for it. Because up until this point in time, most of the stuff I've worked with has only been domestic wood, and I've wanted to kind of experiment and learn a little bit more and kind of work with some different stuff. But when it comes to my actual opinion of this Makore wood, that's where things start to get kind of interesting. Because on one hand, this is honestly some of the most beautiful wood I have ever worked with. The one project that I've managed to complete out of this wood, it looks absolutely amazing. The colors, the tones in the wood, all these just natural occurrences within the wood. It is such a beautiful color, as well as actually the color itself. It's this kind of warm cinnamon brown when it's finished, and again, it's just so beautiful. Now, I did run into one major problem while working with this wood, specifically, and it's just a characteristic of the wood. And you might be surprised to hear that it's nothing to actually do with the hardness, because this wood only scores about 1200 on the Janka hardness scale, which is very similar to something like white oak or hard maple. So the hardness is not what caused the problem. The main problem with this Makore is that it has an extremely high silica content. Now, if you've never heard of silica before, basically it's this fine, almost sand-like substance that gets within the pores of the wood, and what this ends up causing is premature dulling on any of your cutting edges. So on tools like the table saw or with the router or anything that had a carbide tip blade, I didn't run into too serious of problems. But this wood absolutely destroys bandsaw blades. I was extremely impressed with how quickly I could go through a bandsaw blade, and that's all because of that extremely high silica content in this Makore. Alright, so since that last clip where we resawed down this Makore, it's been about 2 weeks. And what I have now realized is that I can no longer continue on with this project using this material. Because when I went through and split up these pieces, what ended up happening is we released so much tension in this piece of 8-quarter stock that we have about a 1/4 inch difference between the middle of the board here, so kind of this area here, and this outside edge. So what that would mean is in order to get this whole board nice and flattened off like we would need it for the project, we'd have to remove a 1/4 inch material from out here and a 1/4 inch material from the top side here. And we'd only be left with about 5/8 of an inch of thickness to our side panels here, which is just a little bit too thin for what I really want to be doing. Typically speaking, with a cabinet, especially this size, I don't want to make my sidewalls any thinner than 3/4 of an inch because we need a lot of structural integrity there in order to support the weight of this giant cabinet that we're making. So luckily enough, these pieces are also not a total waste either. We still have 2 nicely book matched pieces, and all I'd have to do to be able to get good use out of them is just make them a little bit shorter. So I'm going to set all this Makore aside, and at another point in time, I'll find a project that I think is worthy of pulling this wood back out and, putting it to use. Now, earlier in the video, I said this was a really good learning opportunity for me because this actually gave me a little bit more understanding of how wood works. Because there's basically 3 reasons why the wood would do exactly what it did here, where we have all that change in, the pieces. It went from a nice flat piece of wood to having this now arch to it. So the first reason is releasing of tension, which is exactly what we had here. Because this started out as a piece of 8-quarter stock, and then we went through, we resawed it down in half, the wood released all that tension that was built up within that board that had stabilized around the outside, and through that release of tension, the board kind of tightened up in the middle and ended up creating that little bit of an arch. So it's not really that unpredictable of a thing. And it's one of those things you got to be very careful of, especially in the style of stuff that I like to do. I do a lot of book matching, so this is nothing new, and I've had this happen plenty of times before. I've never had it happen quite this bad, so it might be that Makore has a little bit of a tendency to have more built up tension, or it could just be the length here. I've never done anything this long either. So it could just be the fact that these pieces are quite long. They just weren't that good of a choice for doing this specific project. So with these two boards specifically, I know that it was the release of tension that caused the warping, and I was able to figure that out by eliminating the other two factors, which are the change in humidity and potential wood movement. So the way I was able to eliminate humidity, or like kind of changes in humidity, is because I know that this wood has been in the city of Calgary for at least 6 months. This Makore was also in my shop for about 2 months before I started cutting into it, so it has been well acclimated to the local humidity as well as the humidity specifically in my shop here. And also by going through and checking these pieces with my moisture gauge, they're not reading anything, so there is basically no readable moisture in these boards, so I know that there is not really much chance of that change in humidity causing any problems. We're also in the middle of winter right now, which is fairly dry here in Calgary, so we're not getting like crazy humidity shifts, anything like that. Then obviously wood movement. Wood movement can cause this exact same problem. The trick is that wood movement takes place over time and changes in humidity, temperature, all that kind of stuff. So that's the real defining factor there, is wood movement is going to take place over multiple months. Typically speaking, your wood is not going to move that much when you first resaw it. It is going to move a little bit, but it's not going to move ridiculous amounts. That's one of the common myths about wood movement, is that wood will move. It's going to change its thickness, its width, all that kind of stuff. Those dimensions aren't going to stay perfect for forever. But the trick is that wood movement needs to take place over time. So usually anywhere from a few days to months, even years, that wood is going to move just a little bit, and that can affect your pieces. But we can eliminate wood movement from these pieces specifically because from day one, right after I finished that resaw, I went and placed these pieces on my table saw, measured that gap in the middle, and it was about 1/4 of an inch. Then I measured it a few days later, it was still at 1/4 of an inch. And now, even 2 weeks later, after I split these pieces, after they've just been sitting in the shop kind of normalizing out, they're still at that 1/4 inch gap in the middle there from based against the outside edges. And so by narrowing down those factors, that's how I know that the release of tension, again, because I took a piece of 8-quarter stock, resawed it in half, and just had my pieces just a little bit too long for what I reasonably should have been doing there, that is exactly what caused that problem and has made it so that I can't use the Makore. So by knowing that this is going to be a potential problem anytime I'm doing a resaw on a piece of 8-quarter stock that is about 40 inches in length, I can keep this in mind for any future projects that I may want to do. And it may mean that if I wanted to do this same project out of either cherry, walnut, white oak, I would still potentially run into this problem. And if I want to be very cautious with my material, because wood is getting stupidly expensive at the moment, I might want to avoid using this technique of doing book match sides. So this is one of those things that's just really good to understand about how wood works. Knowing that the release of tension, whether you're cutting down a piece of 8-quarter stock or even you're cutting down a piece of 4-quarter stock into smaller strips, whatever you're doing, you're always going to be releasing that little bit of tension because that board in its solid state has kind of normalized out the tension within it to kind of help it stay straight. But as soon as you start removing material, you're going to be releasing some of that tension and you're going to see a little bit of movement. Same thing if you're changing humidity or you have changes in temperature, weather, stuff like that, that can also lead to your boards kind of warping and moving around. And of course, we can't not mention natural wood movement. Wood wants to move. It's a living-ish thing, so it's going to naturally move and expand and contract, all that kind of stuff. Again, with the seasons, with the changes in temperature, humidity, all that kind of stuff. So all these factors kind of play together to create a little bit more of a challenge for us woodworkers. But again, if you can kind of start to understand all the ways that wood is going to naturally move, it'll help you kind of predict and prevent those problems going forward in future projects. So I do hope you guys enjoyed this little bit more of an educational video. This is exactly the reason why I wanted to start making these kind of vlog style videos, to kind of share some of the stuff that I learned on these projects, some of the problems in that I run into. And this is a perfect example of there's kind of those unexpected problems that make the project a little bit more interesting. But anyway, because I'm going to be setting this Makore aside, we're still going to be continuing on with the exact same project. We're just going to be swapping in cherry, which actually is going to make things a lot easier because it's a much more hand tool friendly wood. It's also a little bit lighter. So the fact that we're building a hanging cabinet here, the fact that we're using a slightly lighter wood actually makes a lot more sense. But we'll talk about that more in the next video where we're going to be breaking down some of that cherry and actually getting to work on the casework of this project with some beautiful hand cut dovetails. So as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one.